Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited to have you all here today. We're excited to have some experts on the line too that are going to move us through the content and facilitate our collaborative learning together. So welcome to Procurement in a Small Business Environment, Strategies for Success. We'll give people about 10-15 seconds to continue to filter into the room, and then we'll officially get things kicked off. So while we're waiting for the room to continue to fill with practitioners and change makers, I'm just going to introduce myself and get us all settled in today's webinar. So my name is Olivia Harp, and I'm the program manager here for network building. We are really excited to have you here for today's webinar. As many of us know, procurement channels provide small business owners with structured pathways to sell their products and services to larger organizations, whether that be government agencies, corporations, and institutions. These channels often include set-aside programs, simplified acquisition procedures, and supplier diversity initiatives designed to level the playing field and create market access opportunities that might otherwise be difficult for small business owners to secure. So we felt like today's conversation was not only relevant, but also very timely, and we're really excited to get into today's content and continue to think together. So just a few housekeeping tips. This webinar is being recorded and will be mailed to registrants and available online within 1 week. And while you are all muted to ensure sound quality for recording purposes, we do want you to engage us as much as possible. So please use that questions box on the Zoom control panel and continue to share your reflections, reactions, best practices, stories, anecdotes. We want to hear it all. But specifically, we also want you to feel comfortable asking any questions that come to mind throughout today's presentation. And we will have a moment towards the end of today's webinar to address your questions with the panelists. And so we want you to get the most out of today's call. We encourage you to join from a quiet space, grab a coffee or snack to settle in. A coffee sounds really great to me right now. And again, we want you to engage us, share as much as you feel necessary. Engage us with your questions and comments using that questions box, and also reflect on ways to apply what you learned to today. Apply what you learned today to your own work. So we are going to hop into introductions for everyone that's going to be moving us throughout today's webinar. But before we do, we want to get you acquainted with that Q&A box. You use the questions box so that we can see your responses. But in one word, how does procurement work? Describe how procurement works in your organization today. So really quick and easy, just one word. We want to hear a little bit more about how you're showing up to today's webinar and what you want to address. So yes, in that questions box, we just ask that you say, just in one word, describe how procurement works in your organization today. Okay, and we have someone say, I see Malsha McKnight. I hope I'm saying your name right. You said complicated. Okay, good, good. That's a great starting point because we are really ready to dig in and provide as much information as possible for today's webinar. So keep those coming in using the question and answer box. And without further ado, I'm going to move forward and introduce Corrine Stewart. She will be the moderator for today's webinar, and she's the program manager for community impact here at Prosperity Now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for introducing me. Hello, everyone. I'm the program manager for Community Impact, and I work on the Good Jobs Collaborative along with Joelle Hughley for the Gates Project. I am joined today by two members of Jobs to Move America. The first is Cassie Beyer. She is the Midwest director who leads a team on equitable public procurement campaigns in Illinois and beyond. Cassie's team works in coalition with community, labor, and environmental groups to secure high road commitments from manufacturers through community benefits agreements. She has nearly 20 years of experience in worker and community organizing, focused on building holistic campaigns that affirm the rights of workers. And we also have joining us Valerie Lizarraga. Valerie is JMA's Assistant National Program Director. She has almost 2 decades of experience working alongside communities to advance justice and equity issues with the goal of creating healthier and more sustainable communities. While at JMA, Valerie spent 2 years supporting the coordination and organizing efforts of the Local Opportunities Campaign, a national campaign to update outdated and restrictive federal grant guidelines to empower cities and states to have the flexibility to incorporate procurement policies that promote community benefits. Since these guidelines were updated in October of 2024, her focus has shifted to support JMA's new Meta Community Benefits Agreements Resource Center initiative. And both Cassie and Valerie will be offering context on public procurement strategies, highlighting important changes happening at the state and federal level, and showing why aligning purchasing with economic empowerment matters now more than ever. And without further ado, I present to you Cassie and Valerie.
Thank you for having us. So today we're going to just give a little more background about Jobs to Move America, the different ways our organization has really helped procurement advance racial justice, worker empowerment, economic empowerment in communities all around the world. We really focus on the public procurement aspect and how federal money can be leveraged for the social good, for the public good. But I do think there are lessons and takeaways that are relevant in private procurement and procurement in small, medium businesses as well. And that's us again. So between us, about 40 years of experience today that we're sharing with folks on leveraging procurement for the public good. And I will start with just a quick background on Jobs to Move America. So we are a national not-for-profit. We are focused on harnessing the power of public procurement to benefit communities and workers. We focus on making sure that companies, and we're generally focused on larger manufacturing companies that are winning million, sometimes billion-dollar contracts of public money, to make sure that they are incentivized to include things that communities and workers really need and really want as part of their winning of a contract. So we are often looking for disclosure and commitment around things like job quality, training for workers, access, especially, I think we all know that in the manufacturing sector, this has been overrepresented by men, by white men, but we are working to create more pathways for women and people of color, people coming out of incarceration, veterans who haven't always been able to access these good middle class jobs. Like we want everyone to have a good job and they can send their kids to college. And then also making sure that the public procurement process is affirming racial justice and workers' rights. We know right now, especially in this country, we're seeing a backslide in these things. So to Kareen's earlier point, we think this is a very important and relevant moment to use every tool in the toolbox to make sure that folks are still able to live the life they want to live. JMA focuses a lot on policy. We're going to talk more about that, and organizing. We're also going to talk more about that, but putting these two together to run holistic programs that create these ecosystems of businesses working collaboratively with community and with workers to make sure the thing is getting made, the wage is getting paid, folks have the training and the support they need. Our offices, in case you ever want to follow up with any of us, we are based in California, Illinois, New York, and Alabama. California, Illinois, and New York are places where there's a lot of purchasing happening, where there's a lot of opportunity to affirm these higher road standards. And then we increasingly see manufacturing, especially moving to southern states like Alabama. So that is also where a lot of our organizing is happening, because that's where we're frankly buying a lot of this equipment, and that's where the opportunity to drive standards up really is. And we don't do this alone. It's not just me and Valerie by any means. We have a great team at JMA, and we also build really important, authentic coalition with community groups, labor groups, environmental organizations, and other civil rights groups, often faith leaders as well, to make sure that a community voice is heard when these big manufacturers are poised to receive, these big contracts. Next, great. So I'll talk a little more about the public procurement, and what we really see as the opportunity around this. So public agencies, federal governments, state governments, local governments, all together spend about $2 trillion every year on goods and services. That's a lot of money. And a lot of that is moving in the form of contracts from the public sector to private sector. And I'll also say that $2 trillion estimate does not include the investments that we saw recently in the previous administration with the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. So there was obviously a huge infusion of cash into the economy. Some of that's been stripped away, but some of it is still moving. So we really want to make sure that there are conditions attached so that if a big company, and again, we're often looking at multinational million-dollar, billion-dollar companies, that when they say we want to do this business, that agencies are including what we call a U.S. employment plan, or USEP, into RFPs. That's asking not only what's the timeline for this contract, what's the tech, what's the past performance of the company, but also asking the company, if we give you this $1.4 billion contract, what's the job situation going to look like? What are wages? What are benefits? What kind of training are you providing to workers? What kind of recruitment do you have? Again, that's prioritizing people who have been excluded from the industry, women, people of color, formerly incarcerated folks. And then also, what kind of partnerships do you have in the community to actually get this stuff done? Increasingly, especially again in our manufacturing world, you can't go it alone. There's no such thing as going it alone and being successful in manufacturing these days. It's a very complicated ecosystem, and we think these collaborative win-win approaches are how we get there. Next slide, please.
Great. Well, again, thanks so much for being here, and thanks so much for having us. I'm going to talk a little bit about community benefits agreements. So we wanted to talk about, I'm going to refer to them as CBAs, not to be confused with collective bargaining agreements. But we wanted to talk about them a little bit today because we see them as a really important tool, like Cassie was referring to help ensure that projects happening in local communities are taking community needs and interests into account in actionable and concrete ways. So CBAs can transform communities by building fair local economies, including advancing equity and benefits for surrounding communities where a project is taking place. A CBA is a private contract between community groups and an employer designed to achieve job quality standards, equity measures, and/or other enforceable commitments. So for those of you that might not be familiar with CBAs, the first wave of CBAs started in the real estate development sector in the 90s and early 2000s. And now they've really expanded to be used as a tool to ensure win-win scenarios in other sectors as well. CBA campaigns are a priority area for JMA. We focus our CBA campaigns primarily in manufacturing, like Cassie was talking about. And when it comes to CBAs, priorities should be set, we think, and by the local community members, usually via a coalition, and negotiated between the coalition and the company. 2020. And priority areas for us when it comes to CBA commitments include creating a jobs pipeline, hiring commitments for folks that have been historically excluded from particular sectors, respect for workers' rights to organize. But other coalitions, other communities might prioritize other commitments. Next slide, please. We just wanted to share a quick example of one of the community benefits agreements that we helped reach, which was our multi-state community benefits agreement with New Flyer of America, which is the largest bus manufacturer in North America. The agreement was reached between New Flyer and the Alabama Coalition for Community Benefits, which JMA was a part of and a leader in. So we just wanted to share a few examples of some of the commitments that were included in the agreement because we think they're exciting and great. So the first one here is it was included that 45% of new hires and 20% of promotions would be from historically disadvantaged groups. There was a commitment to partner in the development of a pre-apprenticeship program and technical training program. There was a commitment to partner on a semi-annual on-site independent safety training and also financial literacy clinic for workers at the facility, and also hiring protections for system impacted people. So these are just a few of some of the commitments that were included in the agreement that we thought were worth highlighting. We could go to the next slide. And we wanted to just share a couple of other examples of CBAs that JMA helped to reach. So the first picture here on the left is a picture of the first set of graduates to complete the first established bus manufacturing apprenticeship program. The program was developed as a part of the CBA negotiated with the company BYD, and it was the first electric bus manufacturer to enter into a CBA in 2017, which was pretty exciting. And then the second picture here on the right is a picture of the graduation of the pre-hire training program established as a part of the CBA with Proterra, an electric bus manufacturer in 2020. Next slide, please. So just to switch gears slightly, but definitely still related to procurement, we did want to share what we think is a really important sort of update around federal grant guidelines that took place late last year that we think really empowers local communities. So the Office of Management and Budget made updates to federal grant guidelines known as the Uniform Grants Guidance. The updates were released on April 4th of 2024. They officially went into effect in October of 2024. And these are some of the most substantial changes to the Uniform Grants Guidance that have been made in decades. These guidelines determine how states, localities, tribal governments, and other federal grantees can spend federal money. So it really marked a historic step in transforming how communities can use the trillions in federal funds that flow to states and cities. And so JMA helped lead the coordination of a coalition of national and regional advocacy groups, labor unions, community organizations, and we formed the Local Opportunities Coalition and worked together really for a couple years to advocate for these updates to the federal grant guidelines. And the revisions clarified that local and state governments are able to attach worker and community benefits to their federally funded projects. The updates explicitly state that grantees can attach job quality, racial and gender equity incentives, and encourage private contractors to uplift local economies and public contracts. So we just I wanted to just share just a few specific and sort of specific and significant revisions included in the updates that we thought would be of interest to folks here. So I'll just share four. So one that we wanted to share is that it removed the ban on geographic preference. So states and cities can prioritize workers and small businesses in their communities when contracting. It allows recipients of federal funds to advance family-sustaining jobs by rewarding bidders for job quality metrics such as wages and benefits, which can include implementing a scoring mechanism like the U.S. Employment Plan that Cassie was talking about a moment ago. It allows for hiring efforts targeted to disadvantaged communities, including workers of color, women, to advance equity and access to quality jobs. And the last one that I'll highlight is that it also encourages federal grantees to purchase goods and services from private contractors that emphasize environmentally sustainable practices and products. And so these updates essentially opened up the door for local and state procurements with federal dollars attached to have the ability to advance good jobs, equity, and community benefits in the public procurement process. And we really hope in the years to come that we'll see these changes taken advantage of and further maximize outcomes and benefits for communities, workers, and small businesses. And I will pass it back to Cassie.
Great. And so I want to kind of bring this down to earth a little bit of just kind of thinking about these small, medium business landscape and the organizations that are trying to navigate this very strange economic world right now, which I imagine gets stranger by the day in some ways. I think for small businesses that are contracting directly with local governments or subcontractors for local governments, this is particularly relevant. So Jobs to Move America in our local coalitions who, as Valerie referenced, work to get these federal rules changed. These rules are permissive, which means we have permission to do all these good things that Valerie just listed. There's no mandate. So there is an opportunity for folks to work in their local communities to make sure that the procurement rules are incorporating these new permissions, that there are actions incorporated into the procurement process that reward local communities, that are also potentially taking account for a larger landscape of initiatives that businesses are doing, not just how cheap can you do it, but if there's other kind of best value provisions that can be incorporated into those contracts. And that can be for primes, that can be for subs. There's, procurement, as you guys know, is a very complicated world, and the public procurement process is even more, it's very legal, it's very complicated. So having these policies spelled out at an agency level, even potentially at a city level can be really, really helpful. But there are concrete local hire initiatives, small businesses initiatives, equity incentives, community benefit incentives that can be incorporated into upcoming RFPs, upcoming grant rules, or grants at the city level right now. And I can just say, as a person who lives in Chicago, I'm seeing a lot of energy around making sure that happens. I'll also say, and I'm sure folks are very familiar with the DBE, MBE, WBE certification process. What we think is possible now because of the federal grant rules goes beyond just the certification. There's more to what can happen in procurement, but this remains a big tool and one I see a ton, especially in construction projects and subcontractors of construction projects. I think for businesses thinking about their own purchasing, that it is, because these are private contracts between private businesses, there's just a lot more flexibility in how purchasing can happen. So if a small business is putting out an RFP, for example, or even is putting out a request for bids, that I encourage folks to be creative about how to affirm your own values in that contract as well. So things we have seen folks discussing and trying to figure out how to incorporate into their procurement processes are I think on the more maximalist thing, where this is a lot of money and we want to make sure this money is being used for good, is doing similar to what we do at with the U.S. Employment Plan, which is really evaluating, when we give you all this money, how are you going to treat workers? How are you going to treat communities? The other option, a more simple option, I think is more appropriate for smaller contracts, can be more just binary questions. I'm thinking specifically in subcontracting or contracting of, cleaning services or landscaping, security, some of those things that might be happening, is asking prospective bidders or prospective subcontractors, do they provide healthcare to employees or not? And again, rewarding those who do. It's good to contract with companies that are treating their workers well. What does do they have a commitment to hiring equity around race and gender? I think there's also ways that could be really interesting to see, has this company, these are databases that are available in states all over, but has this company ever had a wage theft violation? Wage theft is extremely common and extremely prominent in our economy, especially amongst low-wage workers, where worker protections are softer and harder to enforce often. So contracting with a company that when you check if they have wage theft violations, they don't, or they have been resolved. I would not want someone doing work for me that had wage theft from their employer. I think that would be a problem and probably not give a good outcome for the work they're doing if they're not getting paid appropriately. Folks can also choose to buy union, if, especially in manufacturing or in service contracts, where having that training and that standard is helpful. And I think another kind of binary question is whether or not a contractor uses temp workers or uses temp agencies. This is a growing segment of our economy, unfortunately, that really allows for low road standards for workers. And this is a lot of where wage theft, unfortunately, happens. About 25% of temp workers have had wage theft issues where their employer is keeping some of their wages. So again, not somebody I would be interested in contracting, and certainly would not be values aligned with an organization like JMA that cares about workers. So I think that's kind of what we wanted to set the frame there. That's kind of where we're at, and happy to move into the next portion.
Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Valerie. That was very insightful. A lot of these things about JMA's impact I find very exciting, and I'm glad that you were able to do that in Chicago. That's much needed context for our conversation, especially on the way that JMA has harnessed power and shared it with the communities and the workers. And now we're going to move into our panel discussion to dig a little deeper, along with any questions that the audience may have. So my first question, and feel free, either of you, to answer, as economic conditions continue to shift, how is Jobs to Move America adapting its approach to procurement to promote equity and sustainable business communities?
Sure. I can go first, and then Cassie, feel free to jump in if I leave anything out. But yeah, I think Cassie referred to this a couple times, but to put it mildly, we're experiencing some pretty rough headwinds when it comes to advancing procurement policies that promote equity and justice at the federal level. So for JMA, in this moment, going local is really key. Our regional work has always been a focus of ours and really been integral to our approach at JMA. But I think now more than ever, we're really leaning into the fact that cities and states do have power to steer money toward good purchasing programs and focusing our efforts there. And so we're doing this by and advancing this by organizing with coalition partners at the local level to advocate for local governments to adopt high road procurement policies like the U.S. Employment Plan that we talked about a little bit already, and also by advocating for the adoption of policies like local and targeted hire that help bolster local economies and advance equity by providing access to historically underrepresented communities and groups to quality jobs. And I think like our focus is more on local hire policies, which is, you know, the hiring of ensuring that local workers have access to quality jobs for projects happening in their communities. But as I mentioned and inferred a little bit earlier, you know, I think that it's not the focus of our work, but I think similar efforts in certain cities are happening for prioritizing local small businesses, right? Or local MWBEs. And I think they can work in parallel and really well together. So just kind of wanted to clearly state that. And I think I did want to just share before I see if Cassie wants to add anything that we did have a recent victory, a local hire policy victory in the city of Birmingham, Birmingham, which we were really excited about. So there was a local hire ordinance passed at the beginning of this year. JMA worked in partnership with the city of Birmingham to make this policy happen. We've been working with them over the last couple years. So it requires contractors exceeding, you know, a certain amount to have a 30% local local hiring, which is really exciting just given the economic conditions that exist in the communities there. So just wanted to kind of share a highlight because I know, yeah, we can use victories in this moment. But yeah, Cassie, feel free to add anything.
Yeah, I think my only addition is, you know, Birmingham, Alabama is not maybe a place where folks immediately go to when thinking about equitable procurement. And so I just think I think it's a good example because it highlights the scale of opportunity. It doesn't have to be Chicago where I live. It doesn't have to be LA where Valerie lives. Like there is ability to take action in cities and states of all sizes, and really affirm values of local hire and local small businesses and high road standards and equity, where there's will. And a lot of states, especially you know, blue cities and red states, I think would be one way of saying it, have had their hands tied behind their back for so long when it comes to taking action for communities and workers that this uniform guidance permission gives folks a new thing to do, like work to do to make sure that the community is upholding the values that they care about, that's reflected in the rules and the laws of their cities. So I think that's just a really helpful example of kind of the scale of this.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, you know, the agreement that you brokered with New Flyer, that reached several states. Is that correct? Okay, so that's really a great example of what you can do just by reaching out to one company. So thank you. And second question, community benefits agreements are a core part of your strategy. What components make an effective community benefits agreements, such as for job access, training, inclusive hiring, and can be woven into procurement framework to promote economic empowerment through small business engagement?
Thank you. I'll step back a little. I'm going to answer your question though. So we really think about the procurement process and the community benefits agreement as really interrelated. So I want to explain that a little bit more. When we are setting up companies to say we want to do, like, if you give us this contract, we'll do good things. We will pay people this much. We will, you know, have these training programs, we'll have these community partnerships. That becomes part of their binding contract. And again, we're talking about the New Flyers and Kawasaki. We're talking about really big companies that have a lot of extra resources to contribute to these things. So they're making these commitments as part of their contract with a city or a state. Those become binding commitments as part of their contract. And then the community benefits agreement is the way that the people who live around that company are able to affirm those commitments for themselves. So making sure that those actually happen by doing that community and worker organizing is really important to us, and codifying not only the commitments that the company has made to their contracting agency, but also thinking more expansively, and also thinking about the community benefits agreement as a partnership between the company and the community and workers to have a set of goals around, like, we want to fulfill this contract, we want to get this work done, we want to have great hiring systems, we want to have great training. Like, there is a win-win here when we can create these more cooperative ways of doing the work. And that can go a long way in kind of this like procurement and organizing, policy and organizing work that JMA does. And I've said several times, our work has really lived in manufacturing and in these really, really big businesses. But I think a lot of these same rule or same kind of principles can apply for smaller businesses. Also thinking about subcontractors and sub-suppliers as well. And that these concepts are transferable into different contexts where we don't always have to be working at the scale of global manufacturing. We can also be thinking about how cities and states can affirm these standards for companies that are in the community who are doing their best to be good neighbors and to be part of the community as well.
Thank you for that. And your team has helped embed job standards and local hiring into sectors like clean transportation and manufacturing, as you've described. What can organizations in this space learn from your advocacy to connect procurement with specific economic initiatives and community well-being?
Thanks. And again, Valerie, please pop in if I miss anything. So I think one key learning from Jobs to Move America's work over the last, we've been an organization for just under 10 years, is public contracting especially can and should move away from lowest bidder. Lowest bidder is not always our friend. So there is, in procurement, in an RFP, an agency or a city or a state, whoever's the contracting body, can do best value procurement. That's looking at a more holistic version of what kind of outcomes they want to see from a contract. And again, reward companies that are making kind of what I would call pro-social commitments, or that are showing up in their communities in the way that we like to see businesses doing, as being, being community members, as hiring from the community, and things like that. So I think a specific move is just getting public contracting moving more and more toward best value procurement, where it's not just who can do it cheapest, because cheapest doesn't mean best, cheapest doesn't mean lasting. And there's all these other kind of ancillary benefits that come when we see contracts looking at how a community or how a company is really showing up in a community, and not just how fast and cheap can they do it. And you can imagine, we were working on school buses, a school bus campaign recently. I don't have kids, but if I did, I'm not sure I want to put them on the cheapest bus. I'm going to put them on a bus that, came on time and has a great driver, and the folks who put it together were really highly trained, and that my tax money was used to support these social goals of racial equity, of gender equity, and making sure that communities had this relationship with the manufacturer that we want to see. I will also say, the the government is more accessible than folks might think. We frequently are curious about how an agency does their contracting. We can fairly easily, and there's nothing special about Cassie reaching out, but like it's definitely possible to reach out and enter into dialogue with procurement folks to understand what are the rules, what is possible. It is very possible to help shape procurement at agencies. The work that we've done, again, has been mostly in the manufacturing space, largely in the transportation space, as you've heard. So we have worked very intentionally and very closely with transit agencies that do a lot of big contracts, and helped our coalitions of community and labor and faith leaders also say we do want to see these values in contracting. Like, this is public money. We want to make sure that this agency that we are publicly funding is contributing to the public good, is thinking about the public good. Again, is not just thinking about the fastest, cheapest, lowest. And I think the other takeaway is in the framework of a community benefits agreement, like Valerie was talking about, that there is a lot of power and new power in creating a space where, like, literally community members are sitting across the table from CEOs of big companies and making demands on those companies. Again, these are like big multinational, well-resourced companies. It's not easy to get to the table with them. But you can imagine a community benefits agreement that is also including demands around local contracting, sub-suppliers, subcontracting that is, thoughtful about the small and medium business landscape around a factory. So that's a very interesting thing to think about. It's not something that JMA has done before, but it certainly is a way to think about how to further embed good contracting initiatives that support the small, medium business ecosystem around a factory.
Thank you. And my last question is, how can public or private procurement be used as a tool to promote responsible business practices and ensure real opportunities for small to medium-sized businesses to compete and thrive? And also, if you can answer, how has the reception been from public procurement professionals as well? Because I heard you talk about that as well. So.
Yeah, I think, again, really thinking in the public procurement space, really thinking about how RFPs can be set up to do the things we want them to do. I feel like a broken record, but just to continue to affirm those values, to continue to affirm social goals around diversity and equity and inclusion, and upward pressure on wages for, these big companies that clearly can afford it, and training, apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, all of that stuff agencies can ask about. If they think it's important, they can ask about it. And those aren't necessarily mandates. The way that our policy is set up isn't like, you have to do this training, you have to pay these wages, you have to do this kind of hiring, but it's rewarding. Companies score more points if they do. Like, it is in their benefit to do it. So that RFP process is just so it's such an opportunity to affirm some of those goals. I think in the private procurement space, which JMA is like less familiar with, just full disclosure, I think the principle still can apply. So the things that we kind of concluded the presentation with, some of those values, how to affirm values in procurement, I think that's really important to consider, of just how we can reflect those similar principles in just the way we do business as an organization, how we think about our contracting. So I think it's a values-oriented, equity-oriented procurement is really there's just like it's money passing with like ethics and conditions that bring about those like ethics, which I think is very interesting. As far as how we're received, generally procurement folks, especially at big public agencies, these are lawyers who know all the rules. Their job is to know all the rules and follow all of the rules. They aren't always the most excited to have, a group of folks show up saying like, hey, can you do your job differently? But we have found with sustained advocacy, letters, emails, showing up to board meetings, getting meetings with procurement folks, that there is an ability to move them. And the hesitations we get around some of these, the U.S. employment plan especially, which is a pretty, it can seem like a complicated procurement scheme because it's so different than what they've done before. But folks, once they do it once, it's not so hard. And there's like, they get their feet wet and they can see some real value. It also looks good if you're the agency. The agency is contracting in a way that is advancing the good of the city, that is supporting the values of, let's say, the elected official who has done a lot of discussion about, racial equity. This again is in the Chicago context. So I think procurement folks they're very serious people. And they know the rules very well, but we can help them think about it. And I will say that the uniform guidance change, OMB, uniform guidance, when I say these things, the procurement people know these things. No one else has ever heard of these things. These are like very obscure, strange things that like we play with. But procurement know these things. They've known them forever. And when they have heard about the changes made from the campaign that Valerie led around the change of the federal grant rules, that's a big deal to them. This is a sea change in how they're thinking about procurement too. So I think that's powerful too. And there's a little more support and assurance that having these more progressive, forward-looking procurement initiatives are okay and are permitted because it says it in the rules they are. So that has gone a long way in helping folks understand the switch we're trying to do.
Thank you, Cassie. That makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely on track with what I've been hearing from the community, from both communities. And our wrap-up question is, when it's all said and done, what will ethical procurement strategies accomplish for communities?
Our hope is, and JMA's kind of lane in this is, and again, I'm thinking about the public contracting with these kind of larger contracts, is again creating like more transparency and accountability around what companies who are receiving $100 million, billion-dollar contracts are doing with that money. That there is a way to understand how that money is being used for communities and workers, that there's some monitoring of that the agency is continuing to do, and that it is ultimately, the more companies are interacting with that policy, the more companies see that doing good things is a benefit to them, that it's not it is literally an extra cost potentially to have a thing like a training program, an apprenticeship program, although there's a lot of workforce training money, at least in Illinois, that folks can tap into. But that also, like, that makes them more competitive for a contract, and it also is just better. Like, if a manufacturing worker knows how to do their job really well, they're going to do their job very well. If they haven't been trained properly, there's going to be more mechanical issue, there's going to be more safety concerns potentially. So there is it's a kind of a virtuous cycle, and the idea that kind of the procurement process can help enhance some of those business practices as well. So I think that is one thing. And then I also think I saw Valerie come off. I think there's a lot of room for understanding that business doesn't have to go it alone. And these community benefits agreements that we work on are one way to really create this ecosystem around the business so that if the company is willing to play game, is willing to like do some community hiring, is willing to help design a training program, is willing to help seek funding for that training program, is willing to like actually listen to their workers. And we are a union aligned organization, so we care deeply about collective bargaining and making sure workers have contracts in these big facilities. If a company is willing to do something, the community will play ball and will do too. I grew up in a small town, and if like the factory was doing well, all of our moms and dads were doing well too. And if the factory was not doing well, if the factory was on strike, like we all knew that too. And so it kind of makes businesses, especially these larger businesses that can feel just kind of like black boxes, we don't know what's going on. It creates kind of a small town around it where there is a shared investment and a shared goal of making sure this thing is successful, that these trains get out the door, that the bus gets made, that whatever is getting made in there is done really well, and that we can all be proud of that because we all had a hand in making it happen. So I think that's like something we are hoping to continue to foster and continue to see all across the country.
Definitely. You want to add anything to that, Valerie?
I think, well, I'll just say, I can say a very short, high-level sort of wrap-up statement. I think for us, in thinking about specifically public procurement, we believe public dollars should result in positive outcomes for communities where, projects and programs are taking place. I think at a very high level, like that is what we believe, should be the result, that folks that have been historically excluded have access to good jobs, have access to the training for those jobs, which, as we know, results like quality jobs result in like better health outcomes for communities. That small businesses, have a chance to have access to public contracts, which we know can help strengthen local economies. So we think that, those things can be embedded into the public procurement process to really just maximize outcomes across the board for communities. It shouldn't just be, as Cassie stated multiple times, like just to only have like the best outcomes for these like major corporations, right? We should be advocating, or we can be advocating, right, for a win-win scenario and especially for those that are going to be most impacted by, again, projects and projects happening in their backyards.
Thank you. And with that, right, I love that what you said win-win, because it is a win-win for both, right? So thank you so much. And with that, we're going to end the segment for our panel discussion, and I'm going to throw it over to Olivia.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Thank
you all
you.
can feel free to stay on screen. I feel like I'm joining the conversation, even though I was in the background, just like cheesing the entire time. Valerie and Cassie, thank you so much for joining us today for today's conversation. I think a lot of time, especially in the small business entrepreneurship landscape, it's so easy to just focus on what you're trying to get off the ground in your business. So I really appreciate your content. And I feel like it was an invitation for all of us to not only see how like all of our roles are connected, whether we always realize it or not, but an opportunity to kind of like step back and step up, right? And take a larger bird's eye view of the environment in which we are trying to collectively cultivate economic empowerment. So this was a very insightful discussion, a very timely discussion, and a great way to kind of level set all of us on today's call. So again, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. Really enjoyed learning with you all. And I want to invite everyone in the audience to also complete today's survey so that we can know to give you more of the same or learn a little bit more about what you want to discuss for upcoming learning opportunities. But with that being said, Thank you again, everyone, for making this webinar happen. Corrine, Valerie, Cassie, and a whole lot of people, I'm sure, over at JMA that helped as well. But everyone, have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much. Take
everyone.
care, everyone.